Number 10. He died. He got his powers while working as a mercenary for hire for a man named Raoul Bushman, who was looking for an Egyptian tomb. Bushman was a ruthless sort, enjoying the violence he brought to others and killing people to try and find what he wanted. Mark did not enjoy this side of Bushman and punched Bushman after he killed the archaeologist on the expedition, Peter Alrune, in an attempt to protect Peter's daughter, Marlene. During this fight, Bushman ended up getting the upper hand and left him for dead. Fortunately, he was able to make his way back to the tomb before he went unconscious. Marlene and the rest of the exploration team carried his body into the tomb and laid him out below an idol belonging to an Egyptian god, Khonshu. Mark had a vision involving Khonshu, who promised him life in exchange for his loyalty to the god and commitment to do Khonshu's bidding. Mark accepted. Later, Spectre would ponder that he had simply been having near-death hallucinations. Ooh, spooky. Number 9. Military service. Before he was Moon Knight, Mark Spector served in the military as a Marine, and even went to Iraq. While you might not think this is scary, war is actually terrifying. To add to this intensity of his service, he also began having episodes while on tour. Mark actually suffers from dissociative personality disorder, but we'll touch more on that later. He at one point is shown in the comics coming to after seeming to have wandered outside of the military camp, following a voice that called to him in the dark under the full moon. Not only is this in and of itself terrifying, as it could have compromised his fellow soldiers' safety, but concern is expressed by those who leave the camp to find him when they tell him he has actually walked into a minefield. Boom. Number 10. Rare blood disease. What's a Hulk to do when they lack control over their own monstrous transformation? Why, recruit a vampire to help you do so, of course. Monster to monster, so to speak. Before She-Hulk could control her transformation, she would become the Hulk in a similar way to Bruce, whenever she got angry. It wasn't until Savage She-Hulk issue 11 and 12 where she almost died from a rare blood disease and sought the help of Morbius, vampire and brilliant hematologist, that this changed. He gave her a serum that cured her disease and also allowed her to gain control of her transformative abilities. And voila, we were given the capable and in control She-Hulk that we still have today. Number 9. She almost died. Jennifer Walters actually became She-Hulk as a result of almost dying. When Bruce goes to find Jen in issue 1 of the Savage She-Hulk, we find out she's been practicing criminal law, and it is her involvement in the criminal world that gets her shot at for working to put criminals away. Bruce is with her at the time and works hard to keep cool so he can help Jen before she bleeds out. He breaks into a doctor's house conveniently across the street, where no one is home, and uses the doctor's medical equipment to give her an emergency blood transfusion. Whose blood does he use? Why, his own, of course. It's all he has at the time. Yeah, there's a lot of suspension of disbelief required in the first few pages of this issue. Anyways, while recovering in the hospital, the goons who shot her return to finish the job. When becoming enraged, she transforms into the She-Hulk. Talk about a frightening situation. Number 8. Her addiction. Walters has never really made it a secret in the comics that she prefers being the She-Hulk. In fact, the interesting thing about her relationship with being green versus her cousins is that while Bruce thinks of his Hulk ego as something that is a hindrance to his humanity, Jennifer thinks of it as an asset. She finds that she is more confident as She-Hulk. Keeping in mind she still also has a level head when she transforms, but still, it is kind of scary how much she loses herself in her transformation. Or at least thinks she does. In She-Hulk Volume 2 Issue 19, we see her condemned as being a She-Hulk addict in court by Mallory Book, and from there Jennifer decides to explore what it is about herself as She-Hulk that she is addicted to. The sweet resolution to this horror story is she realizes that either way, she is still herself, and regardless of whether she is human or Hulk, she never backs down from a fight. Yay, confidence boosts. What was that? Number 7. All the hate surrounding She-Hulk's Disney Plus series. One of the scariest things in my mind, as well as the silliest, is all the hate surrounding She-Hulk right now. Fortunately, it is being combated by as much love as fans of her comics can muster, as well as a personal Twitter welcome from the man who portrays her cousin himself in the MCU, Mark Ruffalo. But still, there are some people who were next level triggered by Disney's announcement surrounding the She-Hulk series. People are making comments involving how her show will just involve her making sandwiches in the kitchen. And I even read a comment where someone angrily wrote in all caps, "Hulk doesn't need to be a girl," as though they thought Disney was gender swapping the Hulk for the series. Another comment stated, "We have female Thor, female Hulk, what's next, Spider-Woman?" I hope so. I personally love Jessica Drew. These comments make me want to send these ignorant nerds to make me a sandwich in the kitchen while I read them some sensational She-Hulk. I'll share my sandwich with them too. Number 6. Married to Man-Wolf. So, to me, it isn't super scary that she was in fact married to John Jameson, aka Man-Wolf. Just because he's a wolf doesn't mean he doesn't deserve some love, and the two were kind of a cute monster mash pair. The scary part to me about their marriage and love affair was that it was never real. I mean, it was real, they got married, but it only happened because they were both under the influence of Star Fox's power. That's right, he made them feel love for each other and eventually get married. Once She-Hulk finds out about this in She-Hulk Volume 2, the same series in which she and John were actually shown to have fallen in love and get married, she ends up filing for a divorce and annulling their marriage. Could you imagine a world where you were forced to stay with a partner, in fact marry them, but you thought you had wanted to, only to find out that you were somehow manipulated into that? That sounds pretty terrifying to me. Not to mention, as sweet as John can be, he also spent a lot of their time together trying to get Jennifer to give up She-Hulk entirely. Not cool, John. And definitely not cool, Star Fox. Number 5. Star Fox's defense. Even more terrifying is somehow Jennifer ended up as Star Fox's defense lawyer. Granted, this was before she knew she was being manipulated, but really, Jennifer? This case involved a lot of instances of evidence against Star Fox. It's made pretty clear that he was actually manipulating even the court the whole while. You might be thinking, I know what's happening here. When they had the trial later on Titan where She-Hulk found out about her false relationship with John, she was going to find out that Star Fox was manipulating her the whole time. But no, they did not give her an easy way out. She actually discovered that while she had been influenced by Star Fox in regards to her feelings about Man-Wolf, she had not been influenced into defending him or sleeping with him. Yikes! If anything, the way this whole Star Fox sexual assault thing was handled and written is just scary in and of itself. Number 4. Grey She-Hulk. Even though Bruce and Jen are very different kind of Hulks, sometimes their plights are one and the same. After the death of Bruce Banner in the Civil War II event, Jen was shaken to her core and became very connected with her darker side. More specifically, she went grey. If you're familiar with the Hulk but not as familiar with the Hulk family, you may think that doesn't sound so bad. After all, when Bruce typically goes grey, he becomes much more level-headed, smart, like Jen normally is when she's green. So what happens when Jennifer Walters goes grey? Well, she becomes more like Bruce's standard Green Hulk, a monster who is hard to connect with. And trust me when I tell you, this side of her is pretty scary. In Hulk Volume 5, which featured Jennifer Walters as the main character in the absence of Bruce, we get to see her deal with the monster within, a side that is not normally explored with her character. Also, it's just really well written, so yay! Number 3. That time she ripped Vision in half. If you needed more proof that She-Hulk is someone you don't want to mess with, here it is. Before the events of House of M and Avengers Disassembled, She-Hulk is influenced by Scarlet Witch and flies into a rage and becomes the villain for a few issues. By the way, in case you were unaware, the more angry She-Hulk gets, the stronger she gets. She even rips Vision in half. Granted, he's kinda like dead at the time anyways, but still, she rages real hard, knocking down Cap without so much as a second thought. Boom, take that, Cap. Number 2. Survivor of Assault. In the newer Avengers series from 2018, we see She-Hulk wrestle with her appearance in issue 20. In this issue, we see her ugly side fighting her old version, her pinup side. Old She-Hulk berates new She-Hulk for being ugly, a stick in the mud, too serious. The two sides of herself end up getting so heated over the idea of what her identity should be that they devolve to blows over who is right. Jen also opens up about her feelings on being She-Hulk. Yeah, she's had fun and felt confident, and she's looked amazing, but she is fighting for her freedom in this issue to be ugly, because of all the other stuff that she has had to deal with, namely sexual assault. She opens up about unwanted advances and having nude pictures of her published, and laments how her cousin Bruce has always envied her falsely, as although she was admired, she also has had to deal with a lot of sleazeballs groping her, something Bruce never seems to have to deal with. Ladies, in comics, it's hard. Number 1. Her and Bruce hooked up. Yeah, this almost happened in canon in one of the Incredible Hulk annuals, and everyone was pretty shocked. And then it actually happened, on an alternate Earth in Old Man Logan, and everyone was just straight up grossed out. While it isn't shown in the series, it is implied that Jen was the only one left for Bruce to mate with, but that still doesn't really excuse the behavior here. It's also never specified as to whether or not this interaction is consensual, though they have more than one kid together, so I certainly hope so. Ugh. Number 10. ebony blade. The Black Knight is nigh immortal when wielding his magic sword. Originally his power was attached to his ebony blade, a sword forged by Merlin out of meteorite. In fact, Percy would often pretend to be pretty clueless in order to hide his identity, but would transform whenever he brandished his sword. Not going to lie, I'm excited to see a hero that brings an ancient blade to an alien tech fight. I personally love Thor's weapon Mjolnir and the idea of someone fighting with old school but magic imbued weapons. It just makes me think of more classic mythological or historical tales. The tales that actually inspire even our high-tech heroes, to be honest. And I like when we are able to explore and get down to earth. Beyond that, this sword also comes with a curse that at one point transformed the current Black Knight, Dane Whitman, into a living statue. Number 9. He died. Well, the original Black Knight did. Sir Percy of Scandia was once the Black Knight, and after using the ebony blade to fight Mordred, he died. You might be remembering that I mentioned in my last point that he was, nigh immortal when wielding the blade, and you would be right, I did say that. However, Mordred was wielding a sword himself made of the same meteorite, and when Black Knight was stabbed with the blade, it went through even his ebony armor made from the same meteor as well, and he was wounded. How big was this meteor? Just making tons of weapons and armor out of it. Ergo, Percy was nigh invulnerable, but not quite, you see. He died from his injuries. But Merlin enchanted the blade with Percy's spirit, so his legacy would live on and pass down to whomsoever wielded the blade. So, not quite dead. Number 8. Trapped in the 12th century. To some, this may sound like a fantasy, but the 12th century was a pretty gross time, let's be honest. It was a time when many starved and often died of disease or the common cold. This was a time before advance where even if you didn't die in a highway robbery, your end was probably just around the corner, coming to you soon. Where, 30 years old was considered old. Granted, the Black Knight Dane Whitman didn't have to worry about these horrors as much as we would, as he was living in a comic book fantasy and is a superhero, so he kind of has immunity to some of these things. So how did this happen? How did he get to the 12th century? Well, Dane's consciousness was transported back in time after he was seemingly turned into stone by the Enchantress. The Avengers discovered this after trying to transform him back. Dane claimed though that he was good in the 12th century, where he was inhabiting the body of his ancestor Eobar Garrington, and busy protecting the past. The Avengers let him be, and he eventually returned to his own body back in the present when Eobar's body perished. So, does that mean that Dane is his own ancestor? That's some Back to the Future stuff. Number 7. Villainous Past. Before Dane became the Black Knight, but after Sir Percy, there was Garrett. Nathan Garrett is an interesting fellow. He is a descendant of Percy's, who was a brilliant scientist and geneticist who stumbled upon the tomb of the Black Knight and took up his mantle. However, he wasn't quite as noble as his ancestor, and he decided to use the powers of the Black Knight and Ebony. However, he wasn't quite as noble as his ancestor, and he decided to use the name of Black Knight and take up a life of crime, using his intellect to build gadgets that would assist him, including a robotic flying horse. Crazy. He was also apparently a communist and a spy for the People's Republic of China, which seems kinda random. In the end, as he lay dying, he repented and confessed everything to his nephew Dane, imploring him to take up the mantle and redeem the Black Knight's name. Dane agreed and his uncle Nathan died. Poetic. Number 6. Ganyosn. Okay, so this point is mostly scary because it is scary hard to understand. That, and if you imagine being linked to a person in this way, potentially against your will, it doesn't really sound fun. Basically, the Ganyosn is like a psychic soulmate type bond, and this is how we will probably see Kit Harington's character, the Black Knight, brought into the MCU. Okay, here we go. So, the Black Knight in the comics was for a while linked to Circe, one of my favorite Eternals, through this bond called the Ganyosn. The bond was created by Icarus after Dane went all crazy and tried to completely wipe out Circe because she kinda turned him down for a date. Or not really Dane, but Proctor, who is kind of like a bizarro evil alternate of Dane's. Anyways, Icarus creates a bond between Circe and Proctor, but this also affects the main continuity Dane from Earth 616. The two have a complex relationship. After the bond between them gets broken, Dane ends up killing Proctor, but Circe ends up getting injured. Dane feels guilty about the whole thing and travels around the multiverse with Circe while she heals. Eventually, she feels well enough to return to the modern day main continuity with Dane, but then, after Dane is sent back, appears to change her mind. So yeah, I guess we'll see what the MCU decides to do with that horrific mess of a comic story. Number 5. Stone Heart. He has a literal stone heart. I'm not making this one up. During the series Captain Britain and MI-13, while returning from a mission where Black Knight went to retrieve the Ebony Blade from Wakanda, it is revealed that his heart is actually made of stone. Also, the Ebony Blade certainly gets lost and moved around a lot later in the comics. It will be interesting to see if Kit Harington's Black Knight is maybe able to hold on to it a little more tightly than his comic book counterpart. Anyways, his squire or steward at the time, Faiza, is a doctor whose life he saved, and she berates him for not letting her even speak to Storm during their visit, and for keeping things from her, including the fact that he has a stone heart. She alludes to it as a curse, but the Black Knight claims it was a gift from his ex, Cersei. Ugh, is that really how hearts work? Like, do you feel less if your heart is made of stone? Or do you just die? My money's on dying. Number 4. He went crazy. More recently in the comics, Black Knight was actually driven mad by exposure to the blade. It was later revealed to him by historian Rebecca Stevens that the blade has driven everyone that has ever wielded it mad. Based on our understanding so far of the blade, I'm not quite sure how true that is, and apparently Dane was also skeptical. He dismissed Rebecca's claims, despite the fact that she shared the information along with an offer to help him. Black Knight didn't want to hear it though, probably because he was crazy. Number 3. Bloodwraith. Throughout his time in the comics, Black Knight acquires squires and stewards who aid him on quests, very medieval times like. One such squire was Sean Dolan. However, during the Black Knight's time serving with the Avengers and assisting them while he was away from his squire, Sean got a hold of the Ebony Blade. Why was it unsupervised? I don't know. The Ebony Blade made him go completely evil and nuts when it harvested the souls of deceased Sloranians, turning Sean into Bloodwraith. Not even the Avengers could stop him. The best Scarlet Witch could do was strengthen Sean's bond to the blade, trapping him in Slorania. Okay, so maybe Rebecca was onto something. Number 2. Proctor. Ever imagine what would happen if Dane didn't fight so hard against the curse of the Ebony Blade? Well, imagine not, because Proctor is here. Why his name is so different from Dane's, we'll never know. But what we will get to know is what reality would be like if Dane just gave in to all the crazy that the Ebony Blade gives off. Proctor has his own Ebony Blade, and of course it is also very cursed, but this alternate version of the Black Knight just decided to give into it. Fighting does take a lot of work after all. The result was he went completely cuckoo crazy and evil. After being scorned by Cersei, he killed her and went on a plot to kill all other alternate versions of her across the multiverse. This is where the Ganjosan comes in and everything gets really confusing, but we already explained that, so you get the idea. Number 1. The Curse. Back to the curse of the Ebony Blade that I touched on earlier. After Dane returned back to the present after the death of Eobar in the past, you with me? He discovered that the blade had become more powerful, but also more cursed. In order to cure the blade of the blood curse that it had come down with, he was forced to expel Percy's spirit from it, setting it free. Which ultimately sounds like a good move, because trapping a spirit in a sword, even if you're Merlin and it's like for a good cause, still kinda seems like a terrible thing to do to someone. After Percy's spirit was free from the sword, it was cured, until the Submariner Namor got his hands on it and used it to kill his literal monster of a wife at the time. Thanks for that, Namor. The curse then returned and double intensified, corrupting its user Dane. And if you haven't guessed it by this point, the curse doesn't seem to like give up or stay cured, so yeah. Poor Dane. Number 8. Ol' Uncle Nazi. Yitz Perlman was a close family friend and rabbi who had fled Germany with Spectre's family. Oh yeah, Mark is also Jewish. But it is later revealed in a flashback in the comics that Yitz Perlman, who has been a family friend of the Spectre since Elias, Mark's father, was just a kid, is actually not who he appears to be. Mark ends up in an area of the synagogue he is not meant to be in and falls down through a trap door leading into the basement. Further into the basement. He was meant to meet Yitz, who he fondly refers to as Uncle Yitz later in the evening. Yitz is also down in this basement in the dark, and upon Mark stumbling in, decides to reveal his true identity. He lights a match to reveal a bloody corpse hanging from the ceiling and offers Mark the prompt: a rabbi, a Nazi, and a serial killer walk into a bar. Yitz Perlman was actually the adopted identity that allowed Ernst, the man's real name, to escape Germany as Hitler's reign was coming to an end, and avoid prosecution as a Nazi. And as he suggests, he is also a serial killer. This revelation would scar scar Mark for the rest of his life, and leads into our next scary fact. Number 7. Multiple personalities. The traumatic revelation of finding out that his Uncle Yitz was actually a Nazi and serial killer ended up traumatizing Mark to the point that he developed a dissociative personality disorder. Which, I mean, is fair. If I found out that my uncle was a Nazi and a serial killer, I probably would want to take a break from being myself too. For those who don't know, dissociative personality disorder, also sometimes referred to as dissociative identity disorder or multiple personality disorder, is a condition where the afflicted alternates between at least 2 different personality states. The condition is also usually accompanied by blackouts and gaps in one's memory, meaning you can adopt another personality and go about your life in that separate identity or state, and then potentially forget what you were doing or have done. Pretty spooky stuff. And Mark doesn't just have 2 alternate personalities, no, he is a revolving door of 10 personalities, including Jake Lockley, cab driver, and Stephen Grant, millionaire. The fact that he is also capable of transitioning between them so quickly also makes it hard for him to settle down in life. Number 6. He has a kid. While admittedly having children isn't very scary, having a child while also suffering severely from dissociative identity disorder can be. I also think the premise of having a child and being fully responsible for a life is objectively terrifying, but that's just me. Remember Marlene from the Egyptian expedition gone wrong that strengthened his bond to Khonshu? Her and Mark have an on and off again romance in the comics. Kind of to be expected, considering their shared trauma. While the two have never quite been able to make it stick due to the fact that Mark's crime-fighting persona Moon Knight means putting Marlene constantly in danger, and the fact that he is constantly jumping from one of his personalities to the next, there is a time when they actually manage to settle down for a while. During this time, the two conceived a child, and Marlene gave birth to a daughter who is named Diatrice in the comics. Diatrice Alron, she took her mother's last name. The really odd and scary thing is that she's not really fully Mark's daughter. At the time that they settled down, Mark was living as his personality Jake Lockley, and it was because he settled into this personality for such a lengthy period that he and Marlene were even able to make their relationship work. So is Diatrice really even Mark's daughter? I don't know. Sounds like she's more Jake's daughter, I guess. Number 5. Khonshu. You might not think the Egyptian god of the moon Khonshu is a particularly frightening figure, especially since Khonshu is the one granting Mark his powers. But is he? Later in the comics, it is revealed that Khonshu seeks to drive Mark insane so that he can use his body as a vessel to enter the realm of the living. While this ends up being untrue, what is implied instead is even more terrifying. It is implied that Khonshu is simply an illusion that was created to help cure Mark. Ultimately, he recognizes that in order to gain control of himself and his personalities, he must accept them. In doing so, he gains control again and regains his sanity. One of those, ooh, it was all a dream type scenarios. Number 4. Morpheus. No, not that Morpheus. We are instead talking about one of Moon Knight's villains, Robert Markham. To really understand the darker side of this character, it's good to get into the mind of those he fights and also the way Mark grapples with his demons. Not just his internal demons either. Robert Markham was suffering from a rare viral disease and sought help. From there he became a patient of Peter Alroon Jr., brother of Marlene Alroon and son of the original Peter Alroon. Sorry if I'm saying this last name really wrong. My apologies. The experimental drug that Peter Jr. prescribes leads to Robert being unable to sleep and developing psionic abilities. Oh, and he also becomes a boogeyman monster looking type with like claw hands. It's creepy. He ends up being thwarted by Moon Knight the first time, but returns to his villainous ways after mutating even further, allowing himself to link his mind with Peter Jr.'s and use it to project nightmares into other people's minds. Hence his name Morpheus, which is actually adopted from Greek mythology, where Morpheus is known as the god of dreams. Not from the Matrix, unfortunately, in case you thought that was where I was going. But oddly enough, the same source that the writers for the Matrix probably were inspired by for their character of the same name. Number 3. Addiction. Like most heroes, he has also suffered from an addiction. His is one that is actually also a huge global issue in the real world currently, an addiction to painkillers. This happened as a result of a battle between him and Bushman that left him crippled with 2 broken knees. Obviously needing the medication while healing, he ended up developing an addiction to them. Like Mark, doesn't have enough issues to worry about. He sees things, has illusions, was friends with a Nazi, and wrestles with multiple personalities, and fights crime on top of that. And then he also has to wrestle with an addiction? Oh, talk about a rough go. Number 2. His brother is a serial killer. Everywhere you look with Moon Knight, there are just serial killers everywhere, and you definitely don't have to look far for this one. Randall Spector is Mark Spector's brother, who after betraying him by killing his girlfriend and getting blown up by Mark with a grenade, became a serial killer of nurses. Oddly specific. He currently goes by the name Shadow Knight, and his costume and look is also quite terrifying as well. Definitely not someone you'd want to meet in a dark alley. He is part of the cult of Khonshu and was granted superhuman strength and durability by Princess Nephthys, who was also once his lover. Number 1. Brutality. Bushman has obviously been one of Mark's greatest foes throughout the comics, and as a result of such, their fights have been legendary. These fights have also gone to show just how different Mark Spector really is from DC's Batman. Batman can be brutal too, sure, but there's Batman level brutal, and then there's Moon Knight's level of brutal. For an example of just how violent Moon Knight can be, and as an example of how he really sees himself as the one doling out justice, I point you to Moon Knight Volume 5, Issue 2. This is also the fight where Moon Knight shatters both his knees, but even while down he keeps on fighting, and gruesomely too. He manages to cut off Bushman's face using the blade on his crescent moon dart. I don't think I've ever seen Batman quite do that. Number 5. Thena. With Angelina Jolie slated to play Thena in the upcoming film, you may be wanting to know more about her character. Who is Thena? As I mentioned earlier, a lot of the Eternals characters were inspired by Greek and Roman mythology, and Thena is no different. She takes inspiration from Zeus's daughter Athena. In fact, her father Zuras even changed her name from Azura to Thena to resemble the character from Greek mythology. She is a strong character who has also been represented in the comics as a caring mother and noble Eternal who tries to protect the world against Celestials. Her abilities, like most Eternals, are off the charts and include telekinesis, cosmic matter manipulation, flight, super strength, and durability, concussive blasts, healing, and of course, immortality. And that's not even all of them. Number 4. Indestructible. Their immortality knows almost no bounds. I mean, they can die, but to kill an Eternal is like next level challenging. It's so hard you'd probably just give up. In order to destroy an Eternal, you don't just need to kill them. You don't just need to vaporize them. Icarus actually came back from that one. You need to full on eliminate them. The thing about Eternals is they have complete control over their molecular makeup, and are also made up of cosmic energy. So when I say that you would need to eliminate them, what I mean is you would need to scatter them across the galaxy, possibly like galaxies, to fully get rid of them. What happens if you don't end up killing them? They'll just come back. They'll regen and pop right back up. And if you try to kill an Eternal and you fail, you're probably gonna get killed next. And most other types of humans, mutants, heroes can actually die in comics. Well, sort of. I mean, it's still comics, so is every character not kind of immortal? Somewhat? Unless their comics really start to tank. Number 3. They were once human. At least, they thought they were. Sprite is possibly the youngest Eternal in terms of appearance. That is to say, he is a really ancient immortal who is trapped inside the body of a child. Driven to madness by this, he seeks revenge on his fellow Eternals for treating him like a child for so many years, and causes their memories to be altered so that they believe they are humans. His hope was that once they realized who they really were, after working so hard to build their human life, that they would feel intense pain and regret when it came to giving up their human lives and dealing with their true identities, and that the pain they felt would hopefully come somewhat close to what Sprite had felt all these years. Dang, Sprite. That's dark. Number 2. Cersei. Cersei is kind of a big deal in comics because she has also fought alongside the Avengers, stepping in to replace the Forgotten One and becoming a core member through to some of the 90s. She even flirted with Captain America. She also took a break from the heroics in the aftermath of Sprite's trick on all of the Eternals, preferring to continue out her human life as a socialite instead of going back to heroics. Her powers reflect that of Thena's in many ways, also including molecular manipulation and teleportation, but where she really shines is with her ability to produce illusions, even though she's not quite on Sprite's level. She is slated to be played by Gemma Chan. Gemma Chan previously played the role of Minerva in MCU's Captain Marvel film. Number 1. They all died. I know, I said earlier that they were immortal. However, in Avengers Volume 8, things got really dark for the Eternals. We are led to believe they all met their ends fighting one another or just killing themselves. So I guess an efficient way to kill an Eternal is with an Eternal. This happened after the Dark Celestials were revealed to be on their way to Earth. Apparently the Eternals found out that their true purpose was to actually harvest humankind. After being led to believe they were there to protect the humans on Earth and working to do so for thousands of years, this revelation drove them all insane, and they died either killing themselves or one another as a result of their madness. Well, we'll have to wait and see if the MCU decides to incorporate this dark storyline or not. Number 10. His wife died. It wasn't just the fact that she died, it was sort of the way in which she died. Mr. Sinister was once Nathaniel Essex in the 1800s, living as an academic, a doctor, and a student of Darwinism, obsessed with the next step in human evolution. His wife, Rebecca, found out about his experiments on humans in this regard and was shocked. This caused her to go into early labor as she was very pregnant at the time. As a result, the baby was stillborn. She managed to free Dr. Essex's experiments, but unfortunately died as a result of the stress of the whole situation. With her last dying breath, she gave Nathaniel the name he would later take up. You see, he had been about to ally himself with Apocalypse at the time, but Jean Grey warned him of the destruction that would befall the planet if he did, and instead he decided to return to his wife and dedicate himself to his family. All too late, unfortunately. His wife swore she could not forgive him before passing away, calling him utterly and contemptibly sinister. As a result, he would join up with Apocalypse and be transformed, claiming the new name Mr. Sinister. I mean, he is still a doctor, so sort of Dr. Sinister. Number 9 stole a Celestial's powers. At one point, Mr. Sinister ran into Tiamat, who was sleeping, and managed to siphon off some of the Celestial's powers. He used the powers to create an entire city filled with sinister clones, inspired by Victorian London in appearance. As frightening as one Mr. Sinister is, you can imagine how terrifying an entire city comprised of his clones would be. Fortunately, the city was destroyed by the Phoenix Five. Number 8 manipulated Cyclops. Most people are familiar with Mr. Sinister's involvement in the creation of Cable, but for those who aren't, allow me to explain. Mr. Sinister has an unhealthy obsession with Cyclops, believing him to be the perfect specimen. Of course, Sinister has an unhealthy obsession with a lot of things, but his involvement with Scott as a result of his obsession and the Summers line is kind of on a whole other level. Sinister cloned Jean Grey, creating Madeline Pryor, knowing that Scott would end up with Madeline Pryor and the two of them would have children. And he was right, and Madeline gave birth to a baby named Nathan. Nathan then grew up and ended up becoming Cable. Beyond even just the manipulation of who Cyclops would mate with though, it has also been revealed that Mr. Sinister has been messing with Cyclops' life since he was a child. Sinister experimented on Cyclops when he was just a kid for basically an entire year. He is also the man responsible for the separation of Alex and Scott when their parents died in a plane accident. Number 7 created the Marauders. Well, really, even more shockingly, Gambit kind of created the Marauders, but he did it all for Mr. Sinister. Remember when it was revealed that Gambit had a dark secret and everyone thought it was going to be that he was the Witness and the person who ended up betraying the X-Men? Well, it wasn't that. The secret was that he had worked for Mr. Sinister as a retroactive favor after Mr. Sinister helped him to gain control over his powers by removing a part of his brain. Ugh. Also, now Mr. Sinister has that part of his brain, so yeah. Mr. Sinister had Gambit assemble the Marauders and use them to attack the Morlocks, who he believed were abominations when it came to his pursuit of genetic advancement, and had them hunt down and steal baby Nathan from Madeline Pryor. All sorts of evil stuff. Number 6 influenced the High Evolutionary. In the 1920s, Nathaniel Essex's research would live on to inspire another villain in the making, obsessed with genetics, Herbert Wyndham. Wyndham, fascinated by Essex's research, was inspired to do his own testing, though fortunately not on humans, but still on rats. Still, his work would later be considered to be controversial enough to see him expelled from Oxford University. Wyndham would later go on to become the High Evolutionary. The Evolutionary played a role in the Maximoff twins' troubled past, and helped to transform Jessica Drew into Spider-Woman, and later would also work alongside Mr. Sinister, helping to depower all of mutant kind. Mr. Sinister has a ton of evil students, actually, fun fact, including Dark Beast. Number 5 released the Legacy virus. Okay, so he didn't do it on purpose, but still, Mr. Sinister was the one responsible for releasing the Legacy virus. Strife had created the virus and passed on a canister containing it to Mr. Sinister, claiming that the canister actually contained thousands of years worth of genetic material in regards to the Summers bloodline. Foolishly, Mr. Sinister had the canister opened, only to find it was empty and accidentally released the Legacy virus into the world, so named because it was Strife's legacy gift to the world after his death. Quite the gift. Mr. Sinister then frantically worked to cure it, so it wouldn't kill all of mutant kind. However, he was beaten to the discovery of a cure by Moira McTaggart, who actually was dying as she figured it out, passing the information along to Professor X through his telepathy. Number 4 Miss Sinister. One of the creepiest things about Mr. Sinister is he is nearly immortal due to his obsession with genetics and cloning. He even built a failsafe in regards to his preservation in the event of his demise. He injected one of his test subjects, Claudine Renko, with a virus that upon his death would activate. This ended up transforming her into the perfect female genetic clone of Mr. Sinister. As such, she also became obsessed with manipulating the X-Men and causing harm to innocent life through experimentation. After being stabbed by Dakan for messing with him, she seeks out and traps X-23 in an attempt to transfer her consciousness into Laura's body and escape the overwhelming consciousness of Mr. Sinister, which has been plaguing her mind. Her plot ended up being foiled by Mr. Sinister himself, who invaded X-23's mind and forced her to attack Miss Sinister. X-23 escaped along with Gambit, who was accompanying her at the time, and a girl named Alice, a clone who had actually led them to Miss Sinister. However, Miss Sinister managed to just barely survive this encounter, and so did Mr. Sinister, who had taken possession of the 5th clone of Alice, transferring his consciousness into her. So now we have a creepy young girl version of Mr. Sinister in this story. Ugh. Number 3. Essex House. An interesting and disturbing Easter egg can be found in Deadpool 2 that is a reference to Mr. Sinister. Did you manage to spot it? The orphanage that Russell and Domino were raised in was called the Essex House of Mutant Rehabilitation. While I don't think Nathaniel Essex would think of abusing mutants for religious reasons, like the headmaster did, Mr. Sinister would definitely have tortured the children there in regards to experimentation and testing. The orphanage is stated as being owned by the Essex Corporation, which has also been referred to in other X-Men films. A corporation that was obsessed with collecting genetic mutant material. How interesting. Mr. Sinister was even rumored to have been the big bad in the film Logan. However, he never appeared there. Guess we'll have to wait and see if he appears in the MCU's version of X-Men? Totally would have made sense that he was behind X-23's cloning and everything, but whatever. Number 2. Experimented on his son. Nathaniel's son died of a natural malady that he was born with. He was malformed and apparently was too weak to live. We later find out that after his son's death, he dug him back up and utilized his recently deceased son's corpse in a series of experiments. The goal of his work was noble, to help prevent the condition his son died from in others, but he still managed to shock his wife to death with this. Beyond that, it's implied that Nathaniel may have experimented on his son while he was alive, trying to cure or fix him of his natural ailment, which, like, sure, he's just trying to be a doctor, but also, like, WTF? That's kind of messed up. Number 1. Worked as a scientist at Auschwitz. Mr. Sinister was actually allied with the Nazis during World War II, unsurprisingly. Shockingly though, he worked as a scientist at Auschwitz, where he was given the right to take anyone from the concentration camp that he so chose. He could even save people who were just about to enter the gas chamber. I use the term save, of course, lightly. What he was really doing was taking people to experiment on, in particular searching for mutants among those trapped in the camp. He was given the nickname Nosferatu, as it was rumored he would give you sweets in exchange for a blood sample. Even German soldiers were afraid of this Mr. Sinister. Number 10. Thanos. So if you're a Marvel fan, you may be aware of all the countless retcons that have existed, but you also might not even be aware of all of them depending on where you jumped into the comics. Retcons seem to happen in the Marvel universe daily. One of my least favorite retcons being that Scarlet Witch is no longer a mutant or Magneto's daughter. To that I say #NotMyWanda. One such retcon that could have been very interesting should the Marvel Cinematic Universe decided to go there involves Thanos. If you are an MCU fan, you know Thanos is a Titan from, well, Titan. But did you know in the comics that he is actually an Eternal? That is right. The comics introduced a retcon after the Eternals became a well-known race that welcomed all Titanians under the Eternal umbrella, which makes Thanos currently what is referred to as a Titan Eternal in comic book canon. But we'll have to wait to see if some flashbacks allow him to be retconned in the MCU when the Eternals take to the silver screen. 9. Subrace. Within the race of the Eternals or group of the Eternals, there are subraces or subgroups. It seems that the MCU Eternals will primarily involve and explore the characters that are part of the Earth Eternals, but it is possible that we may get to explore Titan Eternals, Uranos Eternals, and perhaps even other Eternals, as there have been appearances in the comics of both the Kree and Skull Eternal as well. So who knows what bundle of Eternals we could potentially end up with in the future. All of these races / groups obviously stand to clarify where the Eternals are from, but beyond that there are also like sub races or groups of Eternals, which continue to specify certain regions of a planet those Eternals are from. So yeah, we could get like pretty next level specific with these characters' origins and descriptions if we wanted to. Number 8. Eternals Assemble. While the Avengers have assembled many times throughout comic book history, and by joining together have accomplished many heroic feats, they don't have anything on the Eternals. When the Eternals assemble, they actually have the ability to merge and become the Unimind, a being comprised of at least several Eternals combining all of their abilities, powers, and intelligence. Once they merge together, they transform into light and pure energy, creating the unique Unimind. Kind of like Steven Universe's gems when they merge. Pretty neat and useful, really. Number 7. Who is Alars? So although Thanos is now dead, and many people have speculated that he will not actually get to be classified as an Eternal in the MCU, there is evidence in the film Avengers Infinity War that could support his indoctrination into the world of the Eternals. When Thanos meets Red Skull in his pursuance of the Soul Stone, Red Skull greets him as Thanos, son of Alars. Who is Thanos' father? Mentor. So who is Alars? Alars actually is Mentor, or rather, Alars is his Eternal name, while Mentor is his Titan name. The fact that the MCU decided to refer to Mentor with his Eternal name means that Thanos is more closely connected to the Eternals than we might have thought, and that we could potentially get to see Alars, aka Mentor, join the Eternals' ranks in the film, which would be pretty sweet. Number 6. Celestials. The Eternals are often perceived as being ancient, immortal, and powerful beings in the comics, which might make you think that they are too OP for the cinematic world and could ruin it. To that I say, hold your horses, there are beings that are far more powerful than them in the comics and in the MCU. Namely, the Celestials. You may have seen them pop up every now and then, but who or what are they? And what do they have to do with the Eternals? Well, they are some of the closest entities to gods and life creators that the Marvel Universe has, which I guess makes the Eternals sort of like demigods? Because they are the ones credited with the creation of the Eternals, and in fact superhuman beings on Earth, and even are credited with the creation of the X gene that gives us mutants. They are older than the Asgardians and have been shown to be literally untouchable by the Eternals in the comics. Now that's some real OP stuff. Number 10. Zombie. Yep, Sabretooth was also part of the Marvel Zombieverse. Though his part was small, he looked equally terrifying in his role. Sabretooth was one of the supervillain zombies who shows up to challenge the few power cosmic zombies over the recently slain body of Galactus. Unfortunately, all we get to see is Sabretooth looking ferocious in a panel, and we know that he likely met his end fighting Wolverine, but we don't even get to see his death. Sadly, it appears to happen off panel. Nah, wanted to see that. Oh well, we gotta see him look scary. So, that's a scary fact. Number 9. Killed his brother. Growing up when Sabretooth's abilities manifested, he was just a kid. It was his brother's birthday and his brother refused to share a slice of pie with him. The two children squabbled, as children are apt to do, and eventually the squabble turned into a fight. He ended up killing his brother, biting open his throat with his teeth as a result of his mutation manifesting. Kinda made him, you know, animalistic and violent. When his mom found the two boys, the color drained from her face, but young Victor assured her that they had only just been playing. Aw, playing to the death though, so not aw. Ugh, scary. I'll just say scary a bunch of times, then that'll make these facts scary, right? Number 8. Victim of child abuse. Growing up, Sabretooth's father abhorred him for being what he called a beast. A huge part of this was of course a result of Victor, killing his brother. As a result, his father would routinely torture him because of this, keeping him chained up and even pulling his fangs, claiming that he was attempting to save his son from his own uncontrollable animal instincts. Because young Victor boasted of a healing factor, his fangs would always grow back, and his father would therefore always keep pulling them. Ugh. Oh, sounds terrible. He tried to persuade his mother to release him from his chained prison in their cellar basement, but she refused, terrified of both her husband and of what her son had become. Number 7. Killed his father. Unsurprisingly, Victor ended up escaping the basement eventually, and he managed this by chewing off his own hand, all those Saw memories coming back to me, after he had successfully broken the chain that was holding on to his other one. He then confronted his mother and father in the house with the pliers that had been used to pull his own teeth. In revenge, he killed his father and then rewarded himself with a slice of pie, running off into the night with his disembodied hand clutched in his other. Every time someone cuts off a hand or a leg or a foot or something, I'm always like, I feel like Saw started a lot of this. don't know if that's true though. Probably someone else that inspired Saw. Number 6. Brutally killed Wolverine's lover. Sabretooth and Wolverine have seemingly always been villains, but those who don't know their history might be wondering exactly why this is. The feud can be linked back to Victor's family. Wolverine was once in love with Victor's sister, Clara, which soured their relationship somewhat. Add in the fact that Wolverine just generally doesn't really like or trust Sabretooth, and you've got some reason why the two tangle up so much. But Sabretooth also started hunting Wolverine after his little brother was killed by Wolverine, his little brother Saul. Victor used to torture Saul every day on his birthday, and when he found out that Logan had taken that from him, he decided to transfer the tradition to him, treating Logan like his little brother and causing him grief every birthday instead. Like a lot of grief, like a lot. The first official birthday surprise that Logan received from Victor was revealed in the X-Men Origins Sabretooth story. Sabretooth raped and killed Silver Fox, Wolverine's lover at the time, and much later in Origins we also find out that beyond being a whole plot, this was part of the ongoing feud between the two mutants. Sabretooth would continue to show up on Wolverine's birthday every year just to beat him up. True story. Number 5. Clones. What's more scary than one Sabretooth? Several of them, of course. During Wolverine Volume 3, Issue 55, it had appeared that Wolverine had killed Sabretooth. Killed him with a blade that would mean that he couldn't regenerate anymore, basically cancelled out his powers. But later on it was established that this actually wasn't Sabretooth at all, but was actually a clone of Victor Creed. Turned out that Romulus, who had created the clone, had not just created one, but had created multiple. Yikes! Later on, Sabretooth would make his triumphant return to the comics and reveal he'd just been biding his time, waiting in the shadows for the opportune time to create more havoc in Wolverine's life. Oh no. But oh, it's true, it's true. You think you kill a guy, turns out you don't, because that's comics. Number 4. His obsession with Wolverine. So, Sabretooth's obsession with Wolverine has now evolved to be about more than just the past that they share. As the comics go on, it kind of gets more and more intense actually. Sabretooth is straight up stalker material when it comes to just how much he longs to be Wolverine's #1 arch nemesis. He's like, you can't have any other arch nemesis, it can only be me. Not only does he find him every year on his birthday and try to kill him, but he also kills those that go after Wolverine to protect what he has labeled as his. Only he can kill Wolverine, I guess. Wolverine is his to torment and no one else's. Aw, how sweet. Victor Creed made sure this was known in issue 10 of the Wolverine series out of 1988. He painfully dispatched a pair of thugs who had threatened Wolverine's life on his birthday, wrapping them up like a birthday present and leaving them with an impromptu birthday card that read, "Nobody kills you but me, especially today." Possessive much? Oh my gosh. Also, I don't know, was that the best present that Wolverine's gotten from Victor Creed? It might have been the best one because I feel like it wasn't like a dead lover or something at least. Number 3. He enjoys killing. One of the scariest things about Sabretooth as a villain is that he thoroughly enjoys his kills, especially the women. It's really twisted. In the last few years of comics, we've seen more of a transition in his character. After the events of Axis, he was one of the few that actually stayed flipped for a while. For 3 years, he worked hard at redeeming himself and becoming a hero. Now he's back to his villainous ways, but it was astonishing to me that this was even possible given just how many people Victor has murdered and how much he thoroughly seems to relish killing. He's often depicted after a kill as being covered in blood and looking like he's having the time of his life. He is the animal instinct, unbidden, unashamed, and unchained incarnate. Number 2. The devil set him loose. So you might now be wondering, but if Sabretooth was good for so long and was on a path of redemption, why did he change? Good question. He did enjoy killing, but he had grown past that in the aftermath of Axis and was ready to try to make amends. During the end of 2017's Weapon X series, however, we find out just how this all shook out and how things sort of got switched back. He had taken over leadership of the Weapon X crew, turning them into sort of anti-heroes. This was after Creed had stepped into Logan's shoes for a while following his apparent death, becoming an Avenger and an X-Man for a time. During his time with Weapon X, he ended up sacrificing himself to bring back his and Mystique's son, Graydon Creed, who had died from hell. But the devil was displeased by this, knowing that Sabretooth would feel justified in what he had done and therefore torturing him in hell would just simply not be as fun. So the devil sent him back to the land of the living, but made one big evil change. He freed Victor of any semblance of morality that he had built, turning him back into a vicious and savage monster. Ooh, you know as well if the devil's like, this is a great idea, that's a scary thing that's happening. If the devil stands by it, it's probably gonna be scary. Number 1. Trapped eternally in Krakoa. During the first meeting of the Quiet Council of Krakoa in House of X, one of the first matters brought up was the judgment of Sabretooth. The Quiet Council was seeking to establish what their laws should be while also deciding what to do with Victor. In the end, they determined that they would abide by 3 major laws: make more mutants, murder no man, human, and to respect the sacred land of Krakoa. As Victor had broken the new laws, Xavier offered him 2 choices: a chance to redeem himself or the option of being made an example of. Victor remained defiant and stubborn in regards to being judged, and cursed those of the Quiet Council, swearing that he would kill them all. For this, they decided they had no option but to punish him. His punishment was to remain deep inside Krakoa in a conscious stasis for, well, for forever, or until the Quiet Council felt inspired to give him another chance. This to me is just one of the most terrifying things to have happened to Sabretooth. He's just like snug, deep inside the land of Krakoa, unable to move but still aware, still able to think, alive but unable to do anything with his life. It creeps me out. And who knows when, if ever, we will get to see Sabretooth return again. Though I mean it's comics, so we probably will, but maybe not for a while. Also, that's a creepy way to leave someone. Number 10. Duplicates. When we're talking about duplicates when it comes to Mastermind, we're talking about a few things. Firstly, this is a constant fight tactic of Jason's. He often uses his illusion abilities to create duplicates of himself to trick and confuse his opponents. Imagine thousands of masterminds. That's certainly scarier than one. But there are also just multiple masterminds. What I mean is, there are multiple people who have taken up that evil mantle. There is the AI enemy of Captain Britain known as Mastermind, who can also project holograms and create illusions, but more notably, there are Jason Wyngarde, the original Mastermind's confirmed daughters, Martinique, who goes by Mastermind as well, and Reagan, who goes by Lady Mastermind. Other than the power of numbers, another frightful thing about Jason's daughters are that they are both considered to be more powerful actually than him, or than he was. Cause he dead. Number 9. Leader of the Hellfire Club. Not in the comics, of course, unfortunately. Mastermind had trouble even getting into the Hellfire Club in truth in the comics, but more on that later. However, did you know that there was a popular British TV show in the 1960s called The Avengers? The show was different from the comics as it actually predated Marvel's Avengers team, which legally had to be called Avengers, as the Avengers was already in use by the British television series. The actor that our Jason Wyngarde was inspired by was actually Peter Wyngarde. Peter played the leader of the Hellfire Club in the series, but his most famous role was Detective Jason King from Department S and a self-titled series. Imagine if Mastermind had been the leader of the Hellfire Club in the comics too. I feel like he might have been worse than Sebastian Shaw even. There was even a character in the show named Emma who danced at the Hellfire Club, though she was a spy named Emma Peel, not a telepath named Emma Frost. Also, did you know Hellfire Club is a term for just a general, like, sort of gentlemen's clubs? I didn't know that, but I learned that today. Anytime someone would have said Hellfire Club, I'd be like, you mean like in Marvel? But no, Marvel does not own that term. There you go. Number 8. Enjoys the suffering of others. I mean, this isn't surprising to me, but it sure is terrifying how much Jason enjoys the torture and humiliation of other people. Wyngarde helped the Brotherhood and Magneto to take control of the country Santo Marco by creating a massive illusionary army, making the people of the nation believe they had no option but to surrender. When he sees that Magneto believes in harsh punishments, locking anyone who attempts to rebel in the dungeon, Mastermind exclaims how much he delights in the way Magneto does things. So, not a villain you'd want to be ensnared by then. Anyone who sides with old school Magneto on the appropriate severity of punishment is not a person you want to run into. Although I guess he could only torture you with illusions, so it's not that bad. He'd just make you think you're in the dungeon. Number 7. Wouldn't take no for an answer. So to be fair, I find this pursuit more gross than scary. Especially because it was the 60s, and this was back when we were first introduced to Wyngarde in regards to continuity. He made his first appearance in Uncanny X-Men issue 4, which is incidentally the first issue in which he started heavily hitting on Scarlet Witch, and in a very rude and demeaning fashion. Like, I know it was the 1960s, but even for the era and for comics, it was really rude. I've read some 1960s comics, and this is like going beyond that. And I believe it was definitely intended to come across that way. Scarlet Witch spurned his advances, but that didn't stop the Mastermind from continuing in his attempts to woo her. In issue 7, he offered the world to her, the illusionary world anyways. Anything that her heart desired, a life of luxury, whatever she wanted via his illusion powers. She once again refused his advances, and he once again refused to take no for an answer and started insulting Magneto and proceeded to assault Scarlet Witch. Yikes! Thankfully, Magneto came in and was just like, I want you to be blindly loyal to me, or blindly obedient, and so he put a stop to that. But also, He's just coming in being crazy. Everyone be blindly obedient to me. I'm Magneto. This is original X-Men. Number 6. Turn to Stone. At one point, the Stranger was invited to join the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants in a kind of random turn of events. To impress him, I guess, everyone on the team decided to show off their powers. Toad was leaping, Magneto was meddling things, and Mastermind was illusioning. The Stranger decided to respond by also doing a power flex, enraged by their display, for some reason, I guess because they were kind of torturing him. Unfortunately, Mastermind got the brunt of this rage and was turned to stone by the Stranger. I guess Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch still didn't like Mastermind very much at this point because both powerful mutants kind of just let this happen. Quicksilver just actually remarks on it. He's like, oh no, he's stoned now. Like, you could have stopped that. You're really fast, Quicksilver. But don't worry, Professor Xavier was able to confirm that Wingard was in fact a stone statue, but was also still alive, using his knowledge, his abilities, and a stethoscope, because comics. And Jason would eventually return to his old self. This, by the way, is when he went on a little hiatus from the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Which is fair. I feel like if you get turned to stone, it's a good time to maybe take a break from that. Number 5. Can make terrifying illusions. Jason's illusion creating powers allow him to create anything he wishes in illusion form. Though these hallucinations are not physical, they are so mentally believable that it would be hard for a normal human to dismiss them. It's even hard sometimes for superheroes to dismiss these. Not only does the illusion visually appear convincing, but he can also alter your sense of taste, smell, and touch as well when it comes to his illusions. When the Brotherhood of Evil ended up in a fight with the Blob and his team of carnies, Wingard used his powers to make them believe that their hammers were snakes, and that volcanoes were just erupting all around them, with lava blasting out, setting fire to them and the area. The illusions succeeded in terrifying his opponents, but Mastermind became startled when he was flanked by more carnies. The main weakness of Mastermind's illusions are that if he loses focus, they kinda just vanish. Though Scarlet Witch did imply that he couldn't put up illusions in a large enough area to startle everyone that was attacking them, when he definitely has done that before. Like in that thing with Santa Marco, he actually created like a country's wide of illusions, so I don't understand. So I really feel like Jason actually shouldn't have lost this one, but hey. Comics. Number 4. Manipulated a child. One of the seemingly kind but still evil tasks that he completed as a member in the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants was rewriting a very young Lorna Dane's memory. Using his powers, he altered her memory so that she would believe her parents died in a freak accident. Later, Longshot tried to make her believe that Magneto was actually the cause of the accident when a grown-up Laura went searching for answers. But in reality, it turned out that little Lorna was actually the cause of the plane crash that killed her parents. Her mother fighting with who she thought had been her biological father caused little Lorna to get stressed, and that led to Lorna's magnetic mutant abilities activating, which caused her to accidentally tear the plane apart. In truth, she was actually Magneto's biological daughter, but he wasn't ready for her yet, so he used Jason's powers to make her forget this. While it seems like a kindness, this revelation would later almost cause Lorna to have a psychotic break. In altering her memory, Wingard caused her a great amount of future pain. Number 3. Enslaved Jean Grey. Sort of. Mastermind wanted to join the Hellfire Club's inner circle. To prove himself, he attempted to recruit Jean Grey as their Black Queen, using his skills to manipulate her, and he appeared to succeed. What he didn't know was that this wasn't exactly Jean Grey, but was in fact the Phoenix, whom he was dealing with, which honestly is more terrifying, even if he only managed to successfully bend the Phoenix to his will temporarily. However, she managed to break his hold on her, freeing Cyclops and helping the other X-Men whom the Hellfire Club held captive to escape, before turning her deadly gaze back to her original captor, Mastermind. Number 2. Driven insane! In fact, Jason's temporary enslavement and manipulation of the Phoenix would unleash the darkness within her, causing her to become Dark Phoenix. And in revenge for his attempt to manipulate him, she shared with him awareness of all the psionic impressions in the cosmos, which drove him insane because his mind couldn't handle it. As a result, Wingard was left in a catatonic state and was admitted to a mental institute. He would spend a few years there but would never be fully the same, haunted by the temporary full awareness of the cosmos that he had experienced and the loss of it. He both wanted it back, but it also drove him crazy, so it's like, whoa. Number 1. Created the Void. In the 2005 New Avengers series, we discovered that Mastermind was was actually the one behind the creation of the Void. I know, what? It turns out that he was hired to tamper with Robert Reynolds' mind, making him scared to use his powers. Basically, he made Robert believe that if he did, the devil would basically attack Earth and everything would go crazy. Hence, Robert became that devil. His personality split and he became his biggest fear, the villain that was the Void, as well as being the Sentry. In the end, this is what drove him to erase his superhero persona from everyone's mind, including his own. In issue 9 of New Avengers, we found out this whole split that Robert suffered from, all his fear, was because of Mastermind. Shocking? Yeah, I know. I love how Mastermind is just more powerful after he died in comics. We just keep learning things about him that he did when he was alive. We're like, what? He did that? That's crazy.
Bring us off in at number 10, what's in a name? We mentioned earlier in our intro that Jack is often referred to as merely werewolf, but there are a few other names that the character has too. Jack's birth name is actually Jacob Rusoff. The Rusoff family has a long line of ancestors impacted by lycanthropy, with the first dating back to 1795 when Gregory Rusoff was mutated into a werewolf by one that had been imprisoned by Dracula himself. More on that in a sec though. Jack's mother Laura had fled after her husband Gregor, a werewolf, had been killed with a silver bullet, and his family driven out of their home in Transylvania. Laura relocated, remarried with Gregor's younger brother Philip, and anglicized their last name. Now unfortunately, only more strife was headed their way. From the publication history side of things, fans were quick to point out that his name, Jack Russell, is a breed of dog. Co-creator Jerry Conway has stated that he can't remember how he came up with the name Jack Russell, leaving many historians to believe that he wasn't making a dog reference consciously. Plus, he had never owned a dog or lived with one in his life, so. Up next, number 9, his ancestors. Let's jump back to Gregory Rusoff for this number. In 1795, Gregory was a regular dude with a wife named Louisa living in Transylvania. When Dracula returned to Transylvania, Gregory refused to acknowledge the vampire's authority, so Dracula, being a petty decided to show him by brutally killing Louisa. In his grief, Gregory ambushed and destroyed Dracula, but in the aftermath, he had been mutated by that werewolf Dracula had imprisoned, named Lydia. Gregory would take a second wife, and from there, it's a little hazy as to whether or not his descendants were affected by his lycanthropy genetically. Fast forward to 1930, a descendant of Gregory's, named Gregor, but not to be confused with Jack's father might I add, obtained the Darkhold Scrolls, also known as the Book of Sin, which he bound into a book. Reading about lycanthropy and the scrolls under a full moon triggered the latent genes in his body, and he was transformed into a werewolf. He would go on to kill Jonathan Drew's wife and would be kept in prison by Drew and his partner Windham for decades before using the Darkhold to break free. And yes, the Windham of the High Evolutionary fame, in case you're wondering. Moving on to number 8, escaping Transylvania. Decades after that, another Gregor, Jack's father this time, married the former girlfriend of his brother Philip, a woman named Laura who would be Jack's mother. After giving birth to Jack and becoming pregnant with his sister Lisa, lightning struck the castle that they lived in during a full moon and Gregor transformed. He escaped confinement and attacked local villagers and was eventually killed by silver bullets. As we mentioned, Jack's family was forced to move out of Transylvania, including his grandmother, Maria, who was stoned and fled to live with gypsies and never actually met Jack until he was much older. Laura then married Philip, and Jack was 2 at the time of these events. Alright, and at number 7, tragedy strikes. 15 years later, Philip was blackmailed by a criminal organization called the Committee after they learned of Gregor's lycanthropy. Philip meant to pay them off, but got cold feet about it, and the Committee had Laura murdered on Jack's 18th birthday. I mean, the women in this story not getting a lot of help, although, you know, it was the 70s after all. Still, oh. On her deathbed, she told Jack the truth about his real father and made him promise not to harm Philip before passing away. Jack would still blame Philip for a long time for the death of his mother. Now around this time, he would also get into a fight with a motorcycle gang, infecting them with lycanthropy, and eventually decided to hit the road and become a traveler while he struggled internally with the ancient family curse that caused him to turn into a beast. Moving on to number 6, the Comics Code Authority. Let's take a detour from fiction for a second and talk about something in the real world that massively affected not only Werewolf by Night, but the entire horror genre in comic books. Back in 1954, the Comics Code Authority came to be. It was a non-government regulation on comics that publishers had to follow. It was the result of multiple Senate hearings that questioned how harmful the content in comic books were to their young readers. It mainly axed out violence, horror, and anything that could be perceived as queer, gay, or lesbian content. Now, despite not being mandatory in order to sell comics, it was the de facto censorship for the medium in the US at the height of its influence, and advertisers and retailers looked to see the seal of approval on comics that they marketed or sold for reassurance. Whole companies who focused on genres that were typically censored fell apart, and many different storylines and characters were changed dramatically in the Silver Age to accommodate it. Looking at you, Batman. So what does this have to do with Werewolf by Night? Well, prior to that, one of Marvel's predecessors, Atlas Comics, had published Werewolf by Night in 1953 as a 5-page short story, and after the rules of the code were becoming more lax and werewolves were found as acceptable content again, Marvel hopped on that story and made it their own under the suggestion of Stan Lee. While Werewolf at Night has received praise and earned the adoration of many fans, many horror titles find it difficult to compete with the bigger superhero titles that publishers boast. And prior to the Comics Code, horror comics were all the rage. So one can't help but wonder what kind of success Jack Russell could have had if the censorship laws of the past had been different. Moving on to number 5, the Darkhold Obsession. Jack has killed. He is a werewolf after all. Now, after hitting the road, he would spend the next several years of his life transforming into a werewolf during the 3 nights of the full moon. Eventually, he was kidnapped by a couple named Nathan and Agatha Timley, who would tell him about the Darkhold, and Jack, in his werewolf form, killed them. Sneaking into his ancestor's castle, which Philip had sold, he stole the Darkhold and would eventually translate it, although it was destroyed, thus beginning Jack's quest to learn more about his past and the Darkhold. He teamed up with the sorceress Taboo and managed to find another copy of it, which luckily his ancestor Gregor had copied into a diary. But this was lost after battling Dracula in the Alps. What would follow were a series of adventures in which he would cross paths with other horror comic icons, the likes of Frankenstein's monster, the Jekyll and Hyde inspired Deprave, and Morbius the Living Vampire. Speaking of, moving on to number 4, Morbius the Living Vampire. So Jack has rubbed shoulders with another major horror icon in Marvel's roster, Morbius the Living Vampire. Not only have the two duked it out over the years, but Jack actually appeared as a supporting character in Morbius' solo series from 1993 to 1995. The two would actually work together when Morbius formed a new iteration of the Midnight Suns team, which also had Damien Hellstrom, Jennifer Kale, and Man-Thing as members during Marvel Zombies 4 in 2009. The group, inoculated by a zombie virus vaccine created by Morbius, would investigate a cruise ship attacked by zombie fishmen, unraveling a more complex plan that involved Dormammu. Coming in at number 3, his powers. Jack Russell's powers differ from your typical werewolf. While he does transform uncontrollably when a full moon is out, the character has gained the ability to transform at will, voluntarily outside of the moon cycle, in which he retains his human intellect and general control. This control has fluctuated over the years. In 2004, he was really struggling to control himself, locking himself up in cages and receiving glimpses of hell while he shapeshifted. In his werewolf form, Jack stands an impressive 7 feet tall and gains superhuman strength, speed, stamina, durability, agility, and reflexes. His superhuman sense of smell carries over into his human form when he is not transformed. And like all other werewolves, he is next to impossible to kill but is very susceptible to silver, which has inherent mystical purity. Up next, number 2, the MCU. Jack Russell's appearances have been a bit more spotty in recent times. He was largely inactive during the 80s, and in the late 90s, Volume 2 of his solo series performed poorly and was cancelled. And after the events of Civil War II, Jack Russell hasn't really been around a whole lot. To be fair, he wasn't around a whole lot prior to Civil War II either. He had become a member of the Legion of Monsters alongside the Man-Thing and Living Mummy, who teamed up with the Punisher to protect an underground city home to a bunch of innocent sentient monsters. There has been a bunch of cameos from Jack in other stories, including Civil War II, where Deadpool shot him with a blunderbuss after discovering Jack had an affair with his wife Shikla. But the character is far from entering into obscurity. Reports are he'll be getting the MCU treatment. Many have theorized that the cinematic adaptation that he will be tied to is the Moon Knight feature film, which is in the works. Moon Knight actually debuted in Werewolf by Night issue 32. Plus, Jack has a history with Blade and Dracula, the former having his own feature film slated to come out in the MCU as well. And finally, in at number 1, Tear St. Clair. One of the many cameos Werewolf at Night has made after that little stint with the Punisher was in X Factor. After he was drawn to their base X Factor investigations when Wolfsbane gave birth to her child. The child, who would become known as Tear St. Clair later on, was a cub that prior to birth was hunted down by many supernatural figures, and with the help of Russell, Wolfsbane and the child were able to escape capture and death. Tyr was fathered by an Asgardian wolf prince. When he was born, Wolfsbane rejected him, seeing that he was feral and vicious, attacking Agamemnon, and his existence went against her religious beliefs. After Tyr attacked them, Banshee used her sonic scream on the cub, sending him flying out of the house and into a nearby forest. Hela, who had been tracking the child, tried to claim Tyr but was stopped by other monsters and gods wanting to do the same. So the child hid in a cave. Jack would find the cub and decide to raise him as his own. The two would be pursued by Darwin all across the country until Wolfsbane, Shatterstar, and Richter were able to find them and aid them. Unfortunately, this has a sad ending. Tyr was eventually seemingly killed off in X Factor issue 256 in 2013, and hasn't made an appearance since.